Hi, this is Dan Matson. Please note this podcast was created several years ago. Some of the links, email addresses, phone numbers, and promos are outdated and no longer valid. Thanks and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 117. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan, and this is the world's first podcast fully devoted 110% to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the universe. Thanks for being part of my universe and listening to this podcast. I do appreciate your support. Anytime you want to hook up, you can shoot me an email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. Today's featured segment is part 2 of an interview I did with Iain Oughtred. It's actually not really part 2, but it's a second interview I did with Iain about a week ago. Iain is a small boat designer, very well known around the world, small wooden boat designs. And today's interview is part of my Interview the Expert series. And Iain and I discussed the ins and outs of glued plywood lapstrake construction. And Iain has some interesting perspectives on this, so I would really encourage you to listen to it. It's a lot of fun. He's got some different ideas about things than I do, if you can believe that. And I'm not saying I disagree with him, but the way I've thought about glued plywood lapstrake construction and so on, it's kind of opened my mind to some other ways of doing things. So anyway, stick around for that. In a couple minutes, we're going to get that rolling. This past week, I've only spent a minimal amount of time thinking and doing anything with, thinking about wooden boats. Although I must be really naive because whenever I meet somebody new and somehow the conversation comes up that, yeah, I do a podcast on wooden boats and I've built some boats, and I start telling them about the boats, I get really excited. It's like, this is really cool stuff. And when I don't get that same response from the person I'm talking to, I expect to get that response. I expect people to go, really? You made a wooden boat? Can I see it? Oh, that's beautiful. Wow, how did you do that? What's the history of this? And I rarely get that from people that are outside the wooden boat community, so to speak. So I think I'm really naive because I start telling people about it and I get that response. I'm just like, oh my goodness, seriously? So the way I deal with it, this is kind of getting psycho-babble-ish, maybe, sort of. Not really, but the way I deal with that is I don't just start offering information to people. If our conversation goes that way, I might say, yeah, I do a podcast on wooden boats, and just leave it at that and figure, you know what, if they're interested, they can ask me. That way I won't be disappointed when they don't get as excited about this stuff as I do, because I just automatically assume everybody's excited about wooden boats. So one of my own idiosyncrasies that I am working through, I guess you could say. So if I meet you someday, maybe I've already met you, but maybe we'll meet in the future, let's have a really exciting conversation about wooden boats because I just think they are so cool. And I guess I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast if I didn't think so because, I put a lot of time and effort into this, and I love to do it. And there's not a lot of fame, glory, and fortune coming back, and that's okay because this is such fun stuff. So anyway, there's my rant and rave for the week. The other thing is I am still thinking, cogitating my next boat build. And I got a lot of ideas going through my head. I certainly haven't settled on anything. Some of the things I've thought about doing is building a pygmy kayak, a Pinguino 14.5 Sport, which is a recreational type of boat. Building that from a kit, that's one thing I thought about. I've thought about building a strip plank boat since I've never done that, and I think they're very beautiful. And I've thought about building an 8 or 9 foot pram. And the thing I like about a pram is that it would still be fairly light. Most of the plans I've looked at for that size pram are in the 60 to 80 pound range. Now, I don't know if I could get that on top of a car myself because of the size of a boat. Most of them are around 3.5 feet in beam. That might be a little tough. But the thing I like about a pram is, like this time of year, I could load the pram theoretically in the back of my pickup right inside the bed. I could drive a half a mile to the lake I live by and put the boat in the water and get in the boat without getting my feet wet, without having any special booties in, and sit down and start rowing. And I could get in the boat without worrying about capsize. I don't have to worry about keeping my center of gravity super low like getting into my canoe or into a kayak. I wouldn't have to have weatherproof booties this time of year when it's really cold and the water's probably 55 degrees. So I like that idea in a little boat, is just something I can get into, not get wet, roll around, get some exercise, get out on the water. I love my canoe, but to be honest, I'm afraid to scratch it up. To be honest, I know none of you have ever felt that way about the boats you've worked on really hard. I'm being facetious there. But I don't want to scratch it up. It's got, like, the last time I took it out, put it on my car, I got a little ding in the varnish on one of the gunnels. And it's like, oh my goodness, now I got to go touch that up, because that's kind of the biggest imperfection on the boat. And it's not really a big imperfection. But I just it hasn't gotten used enough to where I'm okay with just, pulling it up on the beach, putting a little sand in it, scratching it here and there, and not worrying about it. I'm still kind of freaked out about it. So anyway, I'm just kind of ranting here, but the pram is definitely a boat that I'm thinking about. And I was reading in the annual edition of Small Boat Magazine today, where they review some smaller boats, and Sam Devlin's Little Petrel, I think it's called the Little Petrel, is in there. And that looks like a pretty cool boat. It's about 9 feet long, weighs 63 pounds in theory. It doesn't have any setup for a sail in it, though. That's the only thing. But it just keeps it real simple. It's just a little rowboat. I suppose you could put a 2-horse outboard on it or something, but it's kind of designed as a tender for a yacht or a bigger boat. But anyway, so I'm thinking about that. The other idea going through my mind, and again, these are just ideas. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Look on Craigslist, find a wooden boat that needs some repair, and repair it and sell it and try to make a little bit of money that way. So, and then I've also thought about starting another scamp, because I really enjoyed building the scamp. The issue I have right now, though, is my garage is unheated. I've mentioned this, and so, it's this time of year, it's hovering between 47 and, 52, maybe 53 degrees most of the time. And so that's I can dress warm, but dealing with epoxy and stuff in those cold temperatures, epoxy just, I don't think is going to cure properly at 50 degrees. I think from the guys I've talked to and what I've read, you really need 55 or 60 degrees, although I know they've got the slow epoxy or the fast epoxy hardener that works in lower temperatures. So anyway, and I have a limited budget too, so I got all kinds of constraints, but it's really fun to dream and think about, okay, what's my next boat going to be? The other thing I think about doing is refinishing my dory, my 14-foot, 2.5-inch semi-dory out of John Gardner's book that I finished building in 97 that I've used a lot over the years. Needs paint and varnish. I've never finished a sailing rig for it, so that would be another project I could do. That's not as exciting, though, as starting a new boat. So anyway, that's the stuff that's been going through my mind here. Yesterday was Christmas here in the west coast of the U.S. We had a great Christmas with my family. I had 20 or 21 people here. And also I gave one of my little wooden benches to my son Luke, so that was kind of fun. So we had a good week. I'd like to give a shout out to couple new subscribers to the monthly newsletter, Trevor Anderson and Chris Spees. Thanks for signing up, guys. In case you didn't know, I do publish a monthly newsletter, and I share resources, tips and tricks, and links to videos and pictures, and just tell you kind of what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats. It is free, and if you'd like to sign up for that, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Give me your first and last name, email address, and you're in like Flint. Okay, that's about it for now. We're going to move on to the interview with Iain Oughtred. Oughtred actually is how Iain said it's pronounced, Oughtred. And it's a lot of fun, so hope you enjoy. Take it away, Iain. Okay, it is December 16th, 2013. I am on the phone with Iain Oughtred. Iain, welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you.
Good to have you on board. And today is kind of part two of our discussion yesterday. And today, as you know, we're going to be talking about Glued Plywood Lapstrake boat construction, kind of the ins and outs of that. So let's jump right in here, Iain. First of all, how would you describe lapstrake construction?
How do you describe? Well, there are variations. Basically, it's a way of building lapstrake boats using plywood and glue instead of the copper rivets or clench nails, and usually epoxy glue between the lines. It's a way of building a traditional-looking lapstrake boat. However, there are simplified variations. You can build dories, flat-bottom skiffs, and, flat-bottom skiffs, that's generally not that well. You can have 2-3 strakes on the top sides. That's gives you a lapstrake appearance, right enough. So you get that quite a range of hull types.
And so what are the advantages, Iain, of instead of using traditional lumber and rivets or so on, what are the advantages of using the glued plywood method?
Well, it depends a lot on the builder, the owner, what the boat is to be used for. Now, the advantages for an amateur builder especially is you've got more easily accessible materials of consistent quality. You've got, you can buy sheets of plywood, you know exactly what you're getting. Whereas looking for planking material for traditional lapstrake boat can vary from difficult to extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Probably difficult where you are and extremely difficult where we are.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little boat skin larch available. And so that can be a real problem. Apart from that, it requires a bit less skill. You can put you get very finely built superbly finished lapstrake plywood boats. But there is a bit more leeway in the way of if you're using epoxy resin for gluing the lines together, then the precise fits are not so critical. And that can save a considerable amount of time. The boat there's other advantages as well. The boat is generally lighter, more easy to carry on top of a car, for example. You can trail the boat on top of a car. Oh, no, you can't. You can carry the boat on top of the car, or you can trail the boat behind the car. And if it's hot, dry weather, the boat won't dry out and split like a conventional lapstrake boat might. So that's, as I say, depending on the use of the boat, that can be a significant advantage. Or if the boat is living in more of a moist atmosphere, more consistent atmosphere, then it's not a great consideration. The boats can be very durable. They can last indefinitely, which applies to pretty much any boat, of course. That's about it, I think.
Yeah, okay. So how did the glued plywood lapstrake method develop, Iain?
Well, as far as I know, the first builder I know of who was doing it was Jack Chippendale, who was building the racing dinghies in England, the national 12-footers, the Merlin Rockets, several others. Those are the most popular ones. And Jack was very good he was a production boat builder when these boats were very popular, and he was able to churn them out very quickly, very efficiently. Much more efficiently than boat builders can do now, because they're not doing the numbers. And he developed ways of setting up the planks, and actually had heating elements under the lines, so that he could warm the glue up so it would go off faster. So he could practically plank up a boat in a day, and then get it off the molds the same day and turn it over. It was such an efficient setup. As far as I know, he was the first one who was doing this, and other builders later on kept on using the same method. And then it was round about 1980s, that sort of time, that some of us began to kind of revive the method, really, with for non-racing boats, for knockabout boats of various kinds, and it just went on from there.
What year did Chippendale start, you think, roughly?
When he started, gosh, that was a long time ago. He was his whole life building boats, and he died last year. I think was it last year, the year before. So he was about 60 years building boats, so it must have been 1950s he was working, certainly. Yeah.
Wow.
At that time, a lot of the racing boats were, not boats in general, many of them were chine plywood boats, V-bottom chine plywood boats, but many designed by Jack Holt. They were very popular as well, more popular with amateur builders. And I don't, as far as I know, the amateur builders were building these hard chine boats and not the lapstrake plywood ones at that time.
What, do you know what kind of glues they were using early in the plywood lapstrake boats, Iain?
They were using urea formaldehyde mainly, which I think is Weldwood. Is that right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Aerolite, it was called in England, and that was a officially waterproof glue. But as far as I could see in my limited experience, it was limited in its durability. And I had the theory that, backed up by 3 or 4 examples, that it lasted 30 or 35 years, about that sort of time. The other glue that was used, that I used myself a lot, was resorcinol formaldehyde, which is more critical to temperature and so on, and not the gap-filling glue in the same way, but it was seemed to last indefinitely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So today, Iain, what materials and glues would work best for this type of construction?
Right, well, as I said, the epoxy is certainly the easiest to use. It's by far the most popular. However, it must be said that there's been this theory the last 30, 40 years that the coming of epoxy resin transformed boat building or amateur boat building. It was a great revolution. It was not. It made some things easier and enabled some techniques to be used, but it didn't change the way that boats were built or stuff stuck together. And I think it needs to be said that some boat builders who become sensitized to epoxy and cannot use it anymore. I've known at least two who gave up boat building for that reason. It was their whole life, and they had to give it up and do something else. And I couldn't quite understand that, because they wouldn't enjoy some of the advantages of epoxy, but there are other kinds of glue which they could use. And the aforementioned urea formaldehyde and resorcinol are both still available, usable. And also now there's polyurethane glue, which is becoming more and more accepted. And there's a lot of boat builders were a bit dubious about it for a while, but they gradually became more and more adventurous with it, using it for until they got up to where they were using it for planking. And the boats seem to hold together all right, and that's probably the simplest glue to use. And it's maybe not as good for gap filling, because if you have too much of a gap, then you get it doesn't sort of fill the gap in the same way. It kind of foams up into a soft sort of what's the word? Spongy sort of stuff that's not really got any strength in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be a bit more careful with your fits.
I see.
You'd certainly get away with 32nd of an inch or possibly millimeter, but not more than that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What tools and equipment are required for this type of construction, Iain?
Well, the needs are not nothing that you don't have already in the toolbox for building ordinary boats or for most carpentry joinery around the house. Nothing special, really. You need a rebate plane for planing the gaines, the end of the planks. You need lots of clamps. I can't think of anything else special. Spoke shaves and 2 or 3 planes at least. Good set of chisels.
Any power tools required, Iain?
Power tools are generally not necessary. It's just up to the builder what they have, and certainly there are some power tools that make things easier. Whether it's worthwhile for a particular builder doing a particular job to invest in those tools is it's his own choice entirely. A jigsaw, saber saw is a very useful thing. Orbital sanders are very useful. Bandsaw is a thing I love to have. Table saw is perhaps the most basically the most useful thing, but all of these you can do without, and if you're building one boat, maybe not worth investing in. If you're planning to build 2 or 3 other boats, more boats, or use the tools for other projects, then long term they will be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most challenging part of building this type of boat?
No particular challenges. There are things you need to take care with, however. Planing the bells on the lands is a thing that needs a bit of careful work and good sharp tools. And as you're gluing up the hull, you need to carefully eye up your plank lines and see that they're fair, because it's possible, if your molds are more widely spaced, it's possible that with a few clamps along the land, the planks can sag a bit between the molds. So that's a thing you need to keep an eye on. It's not a problem. You don't have to take it all apart. If your plank's sagging a bit, you just prop it up. 1 or 2 sticks underneath, whatever it's necessary to shove it into a fair line, and as long as you've got it set in a fair line, it'll stay there once the glue sets.
Mm-hmm. So, Iain, on a lapstrake boat, the angle of the bevel changes along the length of the boat.
Yeah.
How? I mean, just from a outside viewpoint, that seems like it'd be hard to do. What's a method for getting that bevel correct?
Well, the method is you take a tenon saw and you run that across the bevel until you get down to the line of the width of the land, which might be 3/4 of an inch, depending on the thickness of the plywood. Supposing it's an inch, you have that line, 1 inch line, along the edge of the plank, which can be adjusted, as I say, to make sure you've got a fair line along that edge. And that gives you the lower edge of the plank on the outside of the boat, which is the one that is visible, so that can be varied an eighth of an inch or so, if necessary, to straighten it up. Anyway, you take your tenon saw, you run it from the below that land, where you next land for the plank that's not there yet, to that point where it hits the mold, and run it across the edge of your land, and then down to that line of the width of the land. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That gives you a straight line exactly where the next plank is going to go. Then you can use a chisel or plane, well, finish with a plane, block plane usually, plane down to that line. And that way you've got your bevel exactly in line with where the next plank is going to go, all the way along.
So you're cutting a little notch across the width of the plank. I mean, amidships, or what am I trying to say here? Perpendicular to the hull. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then so that gives you the depth at each station on the boat, each mold.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, are all these boats built over a mold, Iain, or some of them built other ways?
They're all built over molds, yeah.
Okay.
And it depends on where your design is coming from. Excuse me. Another critical thing, backing up a bit, is the lining off of the planking. And if you're working from a design, if that's not done for you, that's the thing you really need to be careful with. And the way to do that is there are methods described in books and magazines, none of which really work in practice.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And what they do, it's based on the proportions. You take the midships mold, the biggest one, work out the proportions of the planks all the way around the mold, which may be all the same, or they may be wider lower down on the bottom of the boat. And you take that same proportion, apply it to all of the molds all the way along, all the sections. And but that still depends on getting your shear straight lined off nice and neatly, and your garboard straight as well as beginning. And there's a bit of guesswork or a lot of eyeing things up and variations, chopping and changing involved in that. But if you proportion each plank exactly the same as the midships mold all the way along, what happens is towards the bow, the girth, maybe say a quarter of the way aft or 1/5 of the way aft on the bow, the proportion has got the girth has got much less proportionately, and your planks likewise will suddenly get very narrow, and they'll get pinched up there, maybe say about 2 feet from the bow, average kind of a smallish boat, and then they might appear to be drooping down towards the stem again. So that's the kind of thing that you've got to not depend on the books or any set of instructions, but you just got to play around and make adjustments. And the way to do that is you have thin buttons, maybe half-inch square or half-inch by 3/8, that kind of size, bent around each land, lightly tacked or stapled to the molds, and by making adjustments to those, you can fair it all up until it looks right.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting. So that becomes your fair line, that batten, and then you work with your plank to get to that fair line.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Now, some designers, if you get a complete amateur builder's plan, you'll get all of those. The designer has done that work for you. And so what you get is, if you're getting full-size patterns of the molds, you've got those lines marked on each mold. So you don't have to think about that until you've got your molds set up, and then it's still worthwhile, in fact, to lay, if you have 2-3 battens at least, or maybe a complete set, lay them around the molds just to check it out and make sure it's going to look right.
Mm-hmm.
That can immediately show up any problems you got, any inaccuracies with the molds, or if something's not properly placed.
Okay. So that brings up a question, Iain. If a person is buying plans for a lapstrake boat, glued plywood lapstrake boat, they're going to get drawings. Are they going to get a table of offsets? Are they going to need to do lofting? How does that work?
Well, normally you get your lines plan, your table of offsets, and you loft the boat full size from that. That's the usual way to do it. But I think now more and more amateur designers working for amateur builders are making it easier for them. So you getting full-size patterns for all the molds, your stem and your stern, your transom, whatever. So no lofting is necessary. In my case, I give them a lines plan and offsets as well, which in theory is not necessary at all. However, it means firstly that they can loft the boat themselves if they want, just for the experience, and quite a few builders like to do that. And it helps them to become very intimately familiar with the whole shape of the boat and the structure of the boat before they start, that makes it a good place to start. Also, if you've got anything doesn't fit, you've got some funny line somewhere in your keel or your gunnels or whatever, you can check out your offsets just to make sure you've got it all accurate. And in some cases, you might find one of the offsets 1 inch out, which is an obvious mistake, and you'll presumably, hopefully, just correct that and think, you're doing a silly mistake. Hopefully, you're not spending lots and lots of time thinking you must have, the guy is totally reliable and knows what he's doing, I must have got it wrong.
Okay, yeah.
But it's surprising how some of those obvious silly mistakes, one of my more popular designs, such a silly mistake was there, and nobody ever bothered to point it out. Many of the boats were built, and they were all fine. And then one guy picked up on it, and it was 21 years after I'd started selling the plans for that boat.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
So, do you think a beginning boat builder can be successful building a boat with this method, Iain?
Yes, but
Okay.
Certainly it can be done, has been done on some of the larger and more complex designs. I can give you 2 extreme examples. One is a guy who was used at a boat building class. He had a very skilled, experienced boat building teacher to hold his hand and tell him what to do. He set out to build a simple pram dinghy, and he got the mold set up with help from a teacher. And he spent 2, 3, I don't know how many evenings going around and around these molds and scratching his head and looking at the plans and looking back at the molds, and he just could not do it. Just could not understand how it worked, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He just could not build a boat. And gave up on it. At the other extreme, had a guy not far from here near Edinburgh built the Caledonia yawl, one of the bigger ones, 19'6", relatively complex boat. Never built a boat. And he not only built the boat, but he did it within the specified my estimate of hours it should take to build a boat, which many people don't believe. And I'm very scornful of, thinking they're over-optimistic. He did it within I think it was 400 hours.
Wow.
8 boats, which is pretty impressive. That's 10 weeks of work.
Probably depends on...
It was not full-time work either. It was in his spare time, the weekends, long weekends, long late nights, but he did.
Wow.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the...
Extreme, even like a little more extreme than that. A guy with lots of experience, but had not actually built a boat. Built the 22-foot grey seal. Him and his pal, that was their first boat.
Really?
So that was impressive.
Yeah. That's one of your bigger boats, isn't it?
Yeah, a big cruising boat, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ballast keel and centerboard case, everything, yeah.
Yeah, wow. So, Iain, what particular shape or style of boat is this method best suited for? Or is that a fair question?
Well, I suppose it's best suited for the aforementioned round bilge, straight traditional lapstrake type of hull. But it also works very well for the flat bottom skiffs. You've got lapstrake overlapping strakes on the top sides. And variations in between. I've got a boat which is 2 designs, 2 strakes on the side to make it probably the simplest possible hull. That works, but it does require, because you've only got the 2 strakes, you've got quite an extreme angle between the strakes, so you can't bevel away and get a wide enough overlap for the plank land. So what you do is you overlap it an inch anyway, and it's sticking up in the air, and you've got a gap, maybe half the width of the bevel is on the strake you're gluing to is beveled, and the rest of that great gap you've got to fill with thickened epoxy, micro balloons, or thin wedge-shaped strips of wood glued in, so you get quite a wide overlap on the outside. If you've got using, say, 1/4 inch plank, you might have nearly a 1/2 inch wide edge on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it works, and that's the simplest kind of hull you can do it this way.
Yeah.
But the dories, it works very well. They've got 3 strakes to a side, which makes it simpler. You've got a fairly narrow, flat bottom.
Iain, what thickness of plywood is typically used for the strakes? I suppose it depends some on the boat, but...
Well, for most boats up to around 20 feet, either 1/4 inch or 3/8. I suppose 3/8 is the most common, in fact, but in some cases it's a bit of a problem. You really want ideally something 7mm or 8mm in between, which is generally not available. So it might be, in some cases, you might have a choice between using 1/4 inch mahogany, kaya, some of the hardwoods, or the most common one, which is the okume or gaboon, which is quite light. So you might have a choice between quarter-inch mahogany and 3/8 9mm okume.
Oh, I see. So those would work interchangeably.
Well, more or less, yeah. Depends what the boat is for, really, and size of the boat, obviously. With some of the smaller canoes, you might be using 5mm or even 4mm. I built a little stickleback canoe that I sent you photographs of, and she was 4mm, planking on the house, a 10-foot 8-inch boat. And then an 9-foot conventional lapstrake thingy might be 5mm or 6mm, 3/16 or a bit more, up to quarter-inch.
Okay.
And there again, it depends on what the boat is for. If you're doing a yacht tender, you want the boat as light as possible, you might go for 5mm. On a bit more substantial boat, take a bit more knocking about, you might go for 6mm.
And Iain, do most of the boats, are you going to fiberglass cloth the bottoms and the garboard, maybe? Something like that?
Some builders like to do that. I've never done it myself. I don't like epoxy that much. But some people like to, well, even without the fiberglass cloth, they like to just seal the boat with epoxy. And I think it swings and roundabouts, really. In a way, it's easier in that you've got a more impermeable finish. But what bothers me is that the water is going to get in there. It's going to crack. It's going to wear through. I worry about how it's going to be if the water begins to get into wood underneath that hard, impermeable surface. Then it's more of a job you've got to scrape it back, and it's got to be completely flushed and rinsed with fresh water and thoroughly dried out before you can finish it. Whereas the conventional varnish or oil finish will require more often, perhaps more frequent attention, just rubbing back and priming and touching up again. But it's easier to do. You can do it with a boat that's afloat on the water. You can do it there, and if it's not, if it's sort of 95% dried out instead of 100%, it doesn't matter, because you've got a virtually, effectively breathable finish anyway.
And that would be with varnish or oil, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or oil paint, conventional oil paint.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you've done a lot of boats that way yourself, Iain?
It's what I've always done. It's what I'm used to, yeah.
Do you use the marine oil paints, or do you use conventional oil paints, or?
Well, usually marine. Sometimes I might compromise a bit if I can get precisely the right color in conventional paints, so I'll go for that.
Yeah. So if you were gonna paint a boat, a plywood lapstrake boat, what would be your first layer on the wood? What would you do under the paint? Would you put an undercoat on it, or?
Well, first thing is, I think the beginning stage is the most important. What I do is put 2 coats of primer. And the first coat would be very well thinned. I might use, or if I'm using varnish, I might use it, thin it by maybe 30% solvent, so it really gets into the grain, and especially into the end grain on the plywood edges of the veneer, the edges of the veneers all the way along the strakes. So I might, that first coat, I might be going over and over those edges all the way along 4 or 5 times while I'm just putting on the one coat. And then the next coat of primer might be straight out of the can. And Then the in-between, you can put the top coat, the enamel finish, on top of that. But the usual thing is one or two at least coats of undercoat, which is a kind of filler which enables you to rub it down, cut it back, and get a smoother finish before you put on your top coats.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, those first 2-3 priming, beginning coats are fundamentally important. If you've got a good foundation, the boat is going to last a lot longer, and the finish will require less attention.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'll do the thinning more with the varnish. The first coat might be thin 30% at least. Next coat maybe 20%. Next coat 5 or 10%, and then straight varnish over the top of that.
Oh, I see. How many coats of varnish are you like to use?
Well, the absolute minimum is about 4 or 5, and I have launched boats with 4 coats, and that's a minimum, and it's only acceptable with a definite promise to give her another coat pretty soon.
Yeah.
Before the end of the season.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does it cost more to build a boat using glued plywood lapstrake than using other methods, Iain? Is there a difference in cost? I know that's kind of a hard question, but...
Yeah. I think generally pretty much the same, but it depends on many things. Of course, the availability of the plywood, which is fairly expensive material. Conventional softwood planking material might be more easily available. Around where you guys are, anyway, in the Pacific West Coast. So that could be more or less expensive. Plus, you've got your ribs and your fastenings and so on. I think generally it's roughly not much difference overall.
Yeah.
And a significant difference in the cost of the basic hull is not so much of a difference in the overall cost of the boat. If you've got decking and a sailing rig and maybe an outboard motor and so on, if you save 20% on the cost of materials in the hull, that might make only 4 or 5% difference in the total cost of the boat.
Okay. And then how about the amount of time to build a boat using this method, Iain? How does that compare to other ways, do you think?
I think it may be quicker than traditional lapstrake planking. Again, it depends on experience, really. The old boat builders used to knock out clinker hulls, lapstrake hulls really fast, because they were doing it all the time. But if you order a traditional boat now from a boat builder, it's going to be quite expensive because they're not doing it all the time, so they might take 3 weeks to plank up a hull, whereas your old guy would do it in 1 week,
Mm-hmm.
Small boats. It's hard to say. The quickest is, there's strip planking, and I think that's very labor-intensive because it's very tedious. It's simpler to do, doesn't require much skill at all, but which is maybe why it's popular. But it takes a lot of time, all those little strips, and finishing the interior and the exterior with fiberglass cloth and getting a good finish out of it, that can take quite a lot of time. And the interior especially is very difficult to get right. The quickest method is stitch and tape method, which I've never done myself, doesn't appeal to me at all. Generally, you don't even need molds for it. You just wire the planks together and slap the glass tape on. But even that takes longer than people think, because the laying on the glass tape and perhaps filleting in it and filling it with epoxy and getting it well sealed, and then trying to get a good finish over the top of that glass edge of the tape. That takes quite a bit of time as well. So there again, I think it's not such a huge difference. Your flat bottom skiffs and dories is going to be quicker to plank up than your round bilge. Straight boat, obviously, whichever method you're doing. But I think in the same way as the actual cost of materials, there's so many variations involved. It's a bit hard to be more specific than that.
Yeah, okay. Iain, are there other advantages or disadvantages of glued plywood lapstrake that we haven't discussed today? I can't really. I think we've pretty much covered it. One limitation that's been bothering me a little is the actual material of the plywood. I spent a lot of time when the famous Brunswick Dutch plywood was available. I actually talked to them, phoned them, and got a lot of information. I was asking where does this, where do materials come from? And talking about the Okume, especially, that was generally, well, in their case, as far as Brunswick were concerned, it was absolutely, I promise it was sustainably produced, because it grows fast, and they've got very strict limitations on how much they can take out of a certain area in a certain time. It has to be done that way. It has to be done, grown and produced sustainably. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any left. They just couldn't keep doing it. And so that was encouraging. But then I asked him about the Regina mahogany that they were using. And best he could say was, well, as far as we know, it's sustainably produced. Oh, really?
I said, oh, yeah. Well, it's very difficult to know. They can't be keeping tabs on every single tree that's cut and so on. And that was like 20, 30 years ago. So since that time, there's much greater awareness of or concern about tropical hardwoods and Amazon forests and so on. And the amount of wood that's been taken out of the Amazon and Brazil and so on, it's just appalling and creating a lot of problems. Totally devastating communities of people who have lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And one thing I found was that a German guy sent samples of larch plywood made in Germany from veneers grown in Hungary. Beautiful stuff. I loved it, and it looks totally authentic as well. It looks like and people have to come and look very closely to see this is a plywood boat, not a traditionally plank boat.
Interesting.
Yeah. The problem with that was it was produced in very small quantities and was very expensive. About twice the cost of the conventional top-of-the-range Brunswick plywood. Plus you had to buy 20 sheets at a time.
Oh, wow.
Plus for us getting it imported from Germany. So that was not very practical. But one thing since then I've discovered is you can buy vacuum bagging little outfits which are very neatly designed and work very efficiently. There's a thing called Air Press Developments in England, and I'm sure there must be similar gear available in North America. And it's a very neat little vacuum pump and standard size bags and neat and efficient sealing strips to seal up the edges. So you can actually make your own plywood.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But the simpler thing is you can use the Glued plywood, or whatever kind of plywood, and just laminate one veneer on each face, or just one face. And they do bags up to 8x4, so you can do an 8x4 sheet. Cover one face or both faces with whatever veneer you like. If it's whatever's, according to what's available, of course.
Interesting.
So this seems like a very good compromise, and the gear's not expensive. It's around £650 a standard outfit, which is around about $1,000.
Wow, that's really, I hadn't heard of that, Iain. Have you done some of that yourself at all?
I haven't done it yet, but I really want to. When I get around to building something. It's used in furniture trade joinery for complex curved shapes. So you can lay veneers around pretty fancy shapes, and it's strong enough suction to really suck quite surprisingly thick or even thin plywood into these complex shapes. So with flat plywood, it's obviously easier than that.
Okay. So, Iain, for somebody that's first-time boat builder, what would be from your designs, what would be one or two of the simpler designs to build for a beginning builder?
Well, the simpler ones are the prams, which flat bottom, three strakes per side. They're 8 feet, 8.5 feet, 9.5 feet long. There's a flat bottom skiff, 12-foot skiff, which nice little boat, very well American style skiff. And that can have flat topsides, or as I said, lapstrake into just two planks, which makes it look more interesting and more traditional.
Okay.
They're simpler types. Yeah. Most of the others, the round bilge boats, are fairly sophisticated boats for what they are.
Yeah. Okay. And so, Iain, could you tell us one more time where people can get plans or kits for your boats? I know there's several places.
Well, the plans come from myself. Ideally for me. But in North America, Wooden Boat Store is the main source. They have most of the stock plans, but not all of them yet. There's still several that I'm working on, perfecting, improving, modifying, redesigning, which are not in their catalogue yet.
Mm-hmm.
But most of them they have. And they're very good with, the service is very good and efficient. The other two sources in Britain, there's a thing called Classic Marine in England. They have the plans. Well, they don't actually have them. They get their orders via their website. Send the orders on to myself. And they can take a card number, which makes it simpler for a lot of people. The other one is in Australia, New Zealand. There's stray dog boats in South Australia. Robert Aliff, who does the same thing. He collects orders, and he has a stock of plans there. He's got most of them in stock, so you can get in the southern hemisphere, well, anywhere in fact, you can generally get what you want from Robert, and what he hasn't got in stock I'll send to him, or send direct to the customer.
I see.
Yeah, and Robert's very good at he's very, very experienced builder and teacher, and very good at answering all kinds of queries and helping people along the way with whatever kind of problems they might have, however little experience they might have.
Okay. Very good. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast again today, Iain. Anything you'd like to add to the discussion or any comments here?
I don't think so, Dan. I think we've pretty much covered it for today. Well, just one comment. I was noticing as I was sorting out those photographs to send to you that several of them are traditionally planked boats. And there seems to be, I think there's a growing interest in this method of construction. A lot of people like to do it just for the experience, or just because it was the way it was always done, and so it must be the right way to build a boat. But certainly more and more of my boats are built traditionally, which I think is interesting.
Oh, really? So, in other words, with lumber and rivets and so on? Trunnels?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Steamed ribs.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Iain, and I look forward to having you back on the podcast sometime in the future.
Very good. Well, I hope it's going to be useful.
Definitely. People are going to enjoy this. So thanks so much, Iain, and we'll be in touch.
Excellent. Good
Okay.
stuff.
Thanks, Iain, for doing that interview. I really appreciate you taking the time to do 2 phone interviews. You took a couple hours of your time to do that, and that's really fun. And you've got some great ideas about, just painting a boat instead of epoxying everything and stuff like that. Maybe not putting fiberglass on the bottom of a boat. Some good stuff to think about. Next week, I plan on doing a review of 2013, just looking back at what happened at Hooked on Wooden Boats in this year, in 2013, which is coming to an end here in a few days. Kind of a fun thing to do to see, some of the goals that I met and some of the people I met and what's happening here and what I have planned for 2014. So I'd encourage you to come back next week for that. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube if you look for Wooden Boat Dan there. And also, the podcast is on iTunes. If you'd like to leave a review, I would appreciate that. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. If you go to the store, go to the podcast section, put Hooked on Wooden Boats in the search bar. That'll take you to my podcast, and you can subscribe there and give me a review. That would be really cool. And you can email me anytime. If you got pictures, questions, ideas, comments, constructive criticism, somebody you'd like to see me interview, those are all things that I would readily invite. You can send those to dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. Anyway, have a great week as you prepare for 2014. Maybe you're setting some goals like me. I think that's a good thing to do. If you don't set any goals, you're probably not going to meet any because you don't even know what they are. But anyway, have a great week and keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out. God bless. We'll talk again next week.